This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by OWC, Carl Tatz Design, Jay-Z Microphones, Spectra 1964, and Isotope. You're hearing my voice right now through the Jay-Z pop filter on the Jay-Z BB29 microphone in a Carl Tatz designed room through the Spectra 1964 STX 600 mic pre-complimenter and Isotope RX and Ozone, all recorded safely onto an OWC Mercury Extreme Pro 6G SSD. So get ready to rock.
Kind of what I mentioned earlier, I try and just start throwing the faders up to mix. Once the mix is up, like maybe a pass of the song, start working on that vocal. Actually, there's a thing that I do, which I think is kind of cool, is I've taught myself never to solo anything. If I want to EQ a guitar, rather than soloing it and then getting a great guitar sound on its own and then unsoloing it, I always just try and EQ that in the mix.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. I used to have an expensive pop filter for my vocal mic that was so fragile, I had to put a sign on it warning singers not to touch it or else the thing would break. But not anymore. Now I've got this super durable pop filter from jzmic.com that sounds fantastic. I don't have to worry about stuff breaking and can focus on making music. Go ahead, grab my pop filter. I dare you. Use the limited time coupon ROCKSTARS and get 20% off the amazing pop filter at jzmic.com. Howdy, Rockstar. Are you ready to discover the secrets to making your mixes sound professional no matter what your studio situation? Then check out my free mixing course, mixmasterbundle.com, where I show you how to get pro-sounding mixes in your DAW using simple techniques and free plugins. And when you're ready for more advanced studio skills, then check out Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can learn from Grammy-winning teachers to help you record, edit, mix, and master your best record ever. Use the code ROCKSTAR for 10% off for a limited time. No matter where you like to rock in the galaxy, the OWC Envoy Pro Electron lets you record with confidence over USB-C with up to more than a gigabyte per second of real-world performance. Transfer tracks in seconds and take your sessions with you anywhere you go. Built for reliability, the OWC Envoy Pro Electron is waterproof, dustproof, and crushproof. Find the Envoy Pro Electron and all your OWC storage needs at maxsales.com/rockstars. Hey Rockstars, it's your host Lid Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Clint Murphy, a multi-platinum award-winning producer, engineer, mixer, songwriter, and musician. He's worked on records as diverse as Manic Street Preachers, Enter Shikari, RØMANS, and 50 Cent, racking up hits both in the UK and internationally. UK chart successes include recording and mixing number 2 album Halfway There for English pop punk band Busted, mixing number 3 album Rip It Up for hard rock legends Thunder, producing and mixing and writing for upcoming bands such as Keir, Quartz, Twin Wild, and Youth Club. And most recently, Clint has been working with British rock band Enter Shikari, mixing their critically acclaimed UK number 2 album, Nothing Is True and Everything Is Possible. That's a really cool record with a mix of what I would call like things a DJ would do as well as things a rock band would do. So I'm excited to talk about that. Back in his native New Zealand, Clint's work continually tops the charts through artists such as Devilskin, Opshop, Annabel Fay, The Feelers, Kimbra, Junica, Ladyhawke, 8-Foot Sativa, and Bic Runga. This has resulted in Clint being recognized as Engineer of the Year multiple times at the New Zealand Music Awards. Other international successes include Chinaski's number 1 album, Rockfield, covering 3 number 1 singles, notching up to 60 million YouTube streams, Code's multi-award winning albums Trees, Dream, and Algebra, and Melanie C's multi-platinum album Beautiful Intentions, which spent 9 weeks topping the charts in Europe. Nicely done. Thank you so much to our mutual friend Ryan Smith over at Sterling Sound right here in East Nashville for making our introduction. Please welcome Clint Murphy to Recording Studio Rockstars. Clint, are you ready to rock, dude?
I am very much ready to rock.
Dude, your introduction is a mouthful. You got a lot of award-winning and multi-platinum selling records. Well done, dude.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So give us briefly a little bit of an introduction to who you are in your own words. Give us a short version of starting out on music and getting to where you are. I believe you're in England now, but you're from New Zealand. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. I started out in New Zealand, the classic line of assistant engineer, and becoming producer and that kind of thing. So I did that in New Zealand for a while, and then moved to the UK in around about 2004, and just continued basically over there, or over here, I should say, engineering, producing, and I've kind of really been here ever since, really. So yeah, I mean, I do lots of stuff, but between sort of mixing, producing, engineering, songwriting, I like to keep it really diverse.
Yeah. So yeah, talking about diversity, you mentioned before that it was hard to even choose what to share with us for this because you've done a lot of stuff, and you felt like it was sort of looked rock focused. However, you're doing much more than rock and roll, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that predominantly I am doing a lot of rock stuff because I've had some successful records, making rock records and mixing rock records. But I'm very much into the pop style. I love the kind of the rock and pop elements, combining the two. But I'm also doing things like jazz and country and all this. And I really think it's cool to do that because you can pull elements from one sound or one style of music into another style and really, mold it all together and just have new ways of working, really.
Yeah. So what does pop even mean these days? I mean, I feel like that's a term, a lot of music terms sort of evolve from decade to decade. I imagine that pop kind of means, up-tempo, fun music and probably programmed elements.
Yeah, I think so. For me, I mean, it's especially when you're looking at with a rock band, for example, if I'm producing or mixing a rock band, to bring pop elements into that would be, bringing the programming, the synths, and really just lots of hooks, lots of catchy, vocal lines, rather than just being, full on rock and roll. It's just sort of throwing every hook you can in, really.
Is it also, musically and compositionally imply things like, more strictly major and minor chords as opposed to dissonant harmonies and things like that?
I'm not too sure about that. I mean, it seems a lot of the rock bands I work with often in minor keys, So yeah, I like to try and bring, lots of vocal harmonies and all those kind of things, which are essentially pop, So, and just sort of program bass lines and 808, bass lines and stuff like that, combining real drums with samples, whether it be, some crazy dubstep thing or, just, big hip hop beats and that kind of stuff. It's really kind of what I vibe on doing those kind of projects.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, I like that stuff. And I have a feeling that's the direction I'd like to head with production myself, because I've always been a big fan of DJ music and dubstep and, not so secretly, I'm a wannabe dubstep DJ. But I come from a background of playing guitars and being in rock bands and also playing things like banjo and fiddle. So I love the idea of mixing all these things up.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it sort of come from in my early days when I was living in New Zealand. I did a lot of hip hop records, and it was when I was doing those things, and the kicks were really fat and the big bass lines. And then when I started doing more rock again, I kind of asked myself, why can't we make rock music as massive as that? And, try and sort of add this sort of Dr. Dre element into rock music. So I kind of always strived for that, really, to try and combine those two elements.
Yeah. So one of the records that's in your playlist, I guess I wouldn't necessarily go straight for a hip hop comparison, but it did make me think of like Portishead and things like that, which is Bic Runga. And, I love the sound. I love the way you treated the loops and that kind of stuff and just brought that forward. I think you had recorded that and co-recorded that record, but it's just cool to see the cross section of all the styles you're doing.
Yeah, cool. I mean, she went all over the place to do that. I think she even went to Nashville to do some stuff. I was sort of brought in at the last minute to sort of try and bring all those elements together. Lots of the banjos and all the vocals and stuff like that. So it was kind of nice for me to take everybody else's recordings, kind of chop them up a little bit, and then add her own extra flavors on top. So it was fun. It was a long time ago, that one, and I'm racking my brain to try and.
I think it's 2002 is what it says.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't even know don't ask me any questions about 2002. So tell us a little bit more though about, your background. So you're a guitar player first, or, how did you start out with music and stuff?
Yeah, actually, I started off as a drummer. So I started playing drums when I was about 10 years old. My dad was in a band, and it was he always sort of told me about his band that he was in, and then they did a reunion gig when he was older. They got the band back together, and I saw my dad play drums for the first time, and I just thought that is the coolest thing I've ever seen.
Nice.
And I just kind of thought I want to do that. So I wanted to be a drummer, as my job, and then realized that there's probably not a lot of money in that. And a friend of mine, a good buddy of mine, Troy Kelly, who's got a studio in New Zealand, he sort of helped me kind of learn a little bit of engineering skills. And then I went to School of Audio Engineering, and it just sort of all evolved from that, really. And my first job that I got was at New Zealand's top studio at the time, which is called York Street Studios. And they had amazing gear in there, and they had an amazing 1974 EMI Neve, which is what I cut my teeth on. I loved that thing. It was so cool.
That's pretty cool. And so this would have been in the 90s or early 2000s even?
Yeah, it was sort of late 90s, early 2000s.
Okay. And then you've been now in England for the past 15 years or something like that.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, basically what had happened is when I was working at York Street at the time, I was working with a lot of international producers were coming over. Some people like Greg Haver, Gil Norton, Danton Supple, Jazz Coleman, some of these names. And so a lot of them being British, I formed good friendships and working relationships with these people. And so eventually I kind of just thought, well, England's kind of where the work is, I think, maybe. And if I wanted to progress, I would, jump over the sea and try and get work from over there. So I essentially did that.
Right on. And then what's your studio now? Do you have sort of a regular home base that you're working from?
Yeah, well, I have a studio at my house, which is essentially a mix room. I don't do too much recording there, but it's got some great stuff in there. It's I sort of mainly obviously do mixing there, so I've got some nice analog summing, some SSL summing, and some TG limiters, 1176, lots of SSL gear, and some TG curve benders, and yeah, I just have it nicely set up there, and I've been doing that for the last couple of years, really. I mean, it was something that was really uncomfortable to begin with, because I've always been mixing out on large format consoles. I loved, mixing on SSL. And I guess it's just sort of the time come when I had to sort of, make the transition to sort of mixing in the box, and it freaked me out. It was a hard little jump, a little step, but I would never turn back now. I love it. Yeah.
So mixing in the box, but you also just mentioned SSL and things like that. So maybe dive in a little deeper into what it means to mix in the box, and then integrate that with analog gear as well. Also, the TG stuff is so great. I don't get to use it enough, but when I have, I'm just blown away. And in fact, listening to your discography and listening to how upfront and in your face the rock stuff is, you have this incredible consistency across your records about the rock productions, where it's like you're not going to miss an element. The drums, the vocals, the guitars. And so I wonder if TG is one of those helpful tools that helps you, kind of bring things forward in the mix.
Yeah, well, maybe. I mean, the whole TG limiter thing came from that studio in New Zealand. I was telling about York Street, and they had this EMI console, and so they had 4 TG limiters in the console. They had a Xena limiter for their mix bus compressor, and it's one of those things that right from day one, I just loved putting my vocals through those TG limiters, and
Yeah.
I still do it now. I have, my vocal chain is really my mic into a 1176 and then straight into a TG limiter, and it just gives that excitement for me. I always parallel my drums with parallel compression with the TG limiter as well, and I have my curve bender EQ over top of the mix. So I love still using analog gear, but it's in the mix world, it's really kind of in hardware inserts and things like that.
Yeah. So that you can just, do you find that you adjust that stuff much, or is it more like set it and keep it at one setting, and then your Pro Tools session, for example, is just recalling those inserts?
Yeah, essentially that's kind of what I do. I just keep the settings the same. I mean, for my tracking of vocals, obviously I'm tracking on the way through with it on. I like to just commit. I've always been big on just committing on the way in, and it's always set on limit recovery 1 as fast as it can go. And that's the same for my drums as well. Limit recovery 1. As far as the EQ goes, it's pretty much always the same. I have a little bit of 10K on there and a bit of 70 hertz on the bottom end, and I adjust it every now and then. But it kind of does, a bit of set and forget. Really, it just has a certain, I don't know, magic. It's like a magic box that you put on, and everything sounds great.
Yeah, and which one is it? So I use the TG1, so I'm familiar with that, but I don't necessarily know all the rest of them.
Yeah, so the TG1 is actually, I guess, the Abbey Road, or the Chandler version of what was originally the TG limiter. I can't remember the actual name. I think it's TG 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or something like that. It's the same thing. Yeah, they're great.
Awesome. Do you need to record direct stereo keyboards? Spectra 1964 now offers the Stereo BBDI-2 with custom wound high-Z transformers for big headroom, virtually flat response, and a 15 dB input pad. The Spectra 1964 BBDI passive direct box is also perfect for recording deep bass that will make your mixes sound huge. Plug that into a C610 comp limiter, and as founder Bill Cheney points out, it'll move your pant leg. Get your sound moving at spectra1964.com. With so many game-changing iZotope plugins to choose from, deciding which one to buy next could be a bit of a challenge. But did you know that now you can have all their plugins through iZotope's new affordable subscription bundle, Music Production Suite Pro, for only $19.99 per month? Get your Rockstar extended 30-day free trial subscription now at iZotope.com/rockstars and use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off any individual plugin purchase. All right, cool. Well, let's keep jumping around. Tell us a little bit about, the stuff you're working on recently. I know you're doing a very cool project with Enter Shikari, which is this great hybrid of what I would call like DJ effects and rock band all meeting together in a really cool middle. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, let's do it. They're a great band. They're very much. They're quite big here in the UK, and a lot of people sort of, grew up listening to them, and I guess they're iconic, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
So I was lucky enough to mix not the whole record, part of the record, and I love that stuff because, like you say, it's very experimental. Even the way that they recorded the drums. It was a little bit of a mission to mix, I must admit, because they didn't just record the drum kit as a whole. They actually sampled everything, and because they were kind of writing as they were going, so the drums weren't quite written whilst they were in the studio, so they basically got a great drum sound up, and they kind of sampled every part of the drum kit. Every song has different samples, different sounds, and used Slate Trigger to basically send triggers, and they overdubbed the cymbals. So I had lots to play with. I had a lot of drum tracks. I had like 200 drum tracks to try.
Good Lord.
Yeah, and it was a little bit kind of like, okay, what can I delete? don't need that. Yeah, and but the great thing about that was, the flexibility of what you can do, with something like that. So you could really crush the kick drum room mics, but not the cymbals or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's sort of always the secret of breaking up your drums into different pieces and reassembling it that way in the mix is that, the challenge of having these, if you close mic everything, then you hear the shell of the drum, but you don't hear the cymbals in it as much. But to get a really great sound on the drums, you want to pull that mic away from the shells more, but then you get like screaming cymbals in the mic, right? So
yeah, that's it. I mean, I wouldn't do everything that way. I personally prefer to try and get the the sound if I'm doing my own recordings, live as possible. But if there's something you really want to do to the drums, like really crush it up, sometimes I'll do it without the cymbals and then put the cymbals over top. It all depends on what the record asks for, really, what it needs.
What are some of the tricks that you've learned to pull that off? Because not that we need to all go make records like that, but there are times where I've tried to do that before, and I found that it presented some challenges. So what did you learn about ways to? And plus, it's just really fun to try something new if you haven't tried it before. So what do you learn about recording drums without the cymbals? Like how would we go about doing a process like that?
I think first of all, you need to convince the drummer it's a great idea.
Okay.
So, because, to tell a drummer, hey man, you're not going to actually, play the kit like you should. You're just going to give me the kick and the snare and the, so I think I always sort of explain to them that there's some really great records that have been made like that. Like, as far as I'm aware, I always say that Dave Grohl does, a lot of drums like that.
Yeah.
And people go, oh, cool. If he does it, that's fine then.
Yeah. I remember hearing about Queens of the Stone Age doing that, I think, years ago.
Yeah, exactly. I think, Songs for the Deaf was done like that. And when people, you tell them that, they go, that's crazy. Okay, well, I can do that. So, yeah. And the next thing is, I just get them to basically just give all the shells or the kick and snares and leave the cymbals off. But you have to be really careful with the editing because it's very hard to actually put the two together, and it's a very unnatural thing to play just cymbals on their own or just the shells on their own. So you have to have actually quite a good drummer to be able to do it. But yeah, when they to convince them that it's a great idea, to get a sound up and get an amazing, cool kind of vibe going on and play to them, you can win them over straight away, and they just go, "That's a great idea." I'm actually doing a record at the moment, which is a little bit like the Enter Shikari record. They're a band called 2 Year Break, and it's very much rock, sort of dubstep, crazy electronics, and there's lots of songs that have, I like to have 2 or 3 different drum sounds in a song, so the verse might be totally crushed up, and then the chorus might be like a normal drum kit sort of thing. So, I guess it's just using your ear and trying to figure out what you want to do. And I don't really know what the secret the secret to doing it is. Yeah.
Well, what about some of the challenges? So, like, if you're playing the drums without hitting the cymbals, do you give the drummer something to hit in place of the cymbals? And then if you do, does that create like a ticking sound that can kind of creep back into your recording and cause problems?
Yeah, I try and avoid that where possible. And I've seen other producers and engineers sort of say, just, hit your knee or something. And I just sort of say, do an air cymbal or something like that. Because I think you can hear it. That's the issue. I have no problem with them tapping, their feet on the ground, because I don't think you can hear that. But one of the tricks to making it sound real is if they're playing a hi-hat, say, for example, a hi-hat groove, you need to make sure that you're going to miss out the relevant hi-hat or crash cymbal or whatever it may be, that if there was, say you're playing a 16th beat and it's going back, you need to really, the hi-hats need to go where it misses out the snare. So, and that way you can get some really cool, like, natural sounds, and you can really compress those hi-hats and make it sound really pumpy and that kind of thing. But I like it when it sounds real, even though it's not played real. That would be one of my tricks. Yeah,
I'm totally with you on that, and that is where you start to run into the headaches when you put stuff back together, and you're like, oh crap, the hi-hat's still playing while the snares there. That wouldn't be real in that moment.
Yeah. And I think also, naturally, I would compress rooms, everything on the way in. And the problem is when you have a live drum kit playing, You get that compression going on the rooms, and it sounds amazing. As soon as you break the kit up, what happens is you're only getting compression on, the shells, and then only compression on the cymbals. And then when you mix those two things together, I like to bounce them back into one track often. You end up with this kind of weird compression. Sometimes it can be great, but it's sort of a bit unnatural. So often what I'll do is I'll bypass the compressors on the way in that case. So when I do put them all together, I can then put the compression back on and it feels natural.
I see. So it's more natural to have compression on the whole drum kit than on sub parts of a broken up drum kit.
Yes. Yeah, that's what I'll tell you.
Okay, cool. So one of the records that you've done, and maybe I'm sort of revealing what a geek I am about, drum edits and stuff. I've just done so many of them in my time.
Yeah.
But Stumbling Down by Thunder has got just a kind of a classic 4 on the floor kick drum beat, right? And then these, snare fills come in, 16th note. And then it just sounds like a dumb question until you find yourself in the studio asking it with the band, which is the kick supposed to keep going underneath that snare fill, or does the kick stop for a moment for the snare fill and start again at the chorus?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been one to stop the kick, really, over a big snare fill like that. I just think it's, I have a real issue with what I call glupping. And glupping is when a kick drum and a snare drum are hit together, but they flam.
Oh, God, yeah.
I didn't actually coin the phrase, a friend of mine did, but, it's like boom, glup, boom, glup. Yeah, so I usually try and take the kick drum out to avoid this. This is actually another reason why sometimes I split the kit up. So I take the kick out of the equation, and then I get them to lay the kick over top. If it's a 4 on the floor beat,
Yeah.
But I mean, it's interesting you talk about that record, the Thunder record. This is another thing. I got to watch what I say about people, really, I guess. But hey, doesn't matter. There's a few drummers that have this thing where they kind of count with their right foot. So even though they might be playing a 4 on the floor beat, boom, doom, doom, they might be counting with their right foot. It might be going boom, doom, 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 doom.
Oh, right. Right.
Yeah. And so.
Well, there's also the mashing the pedal where when you solo the kick drum and you hear like.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh man, what am I going to do with that?
I know. Yeah. So, that record in particular had a lot of that going on. So when I first did the original mixes, the band will sort of said, "There's all these extra kick drums. We don't need these." And I'm like, "Oh, okay. I thought they were played, because they were quite loud. Some of these ones in between." So, the way I get around that is often I always get samples of a drum kit. Always get samples of drum kit, and if I'm mixing a record, I always ask whoever's producing to try and get some samples. So what I can do is I can take the appropriate velocity kick drum sample, and I can actually stick it in the track, so it then eliminates those extra unwanted kick drums, and I make it really sample accurate. So I zoom right up and make sure that the kick drum is lined up to where the original was. So it's the original kick sound. I'm not adding extra sample sounds on top. I'm using the kick that they recorded and wanted in the recording. And it just means you can get like a tighter, louder sounding kick drum without all those extra weird noises and stuff in there.
So if we've got a multi-track drum set, are we talking about the close mic only on the kick drum and just replacing that one right there? Or are we talking about over layering something on top of all of it that's taken from, later when we kind of recorded samples of the drum kit?
Yeah, I completely replaced the kick in and out mic, or any kick mics that are there with the original sample of what was used, but and perfectly in time as well. But it just cleans the whole thing up.
Okay, but in other words, the fact that the room might still be picking up that original kick drum wouldn't be something to get too worried about. It like just the close mic is really where the action's at.
Yeah, the thing is, it's not an ideal situation to do that because you still get the sound of the kick in the rooms and stuff, but it's way better than not doing it. I find, by putting that sample in to try and clean up something is better than just saying, well, that's how we played it,
Yeah.
And leave. Yeah.
Yeah. And so using samples in a really quality way, is that part of what allows you to make consistently punchy, powerful rock mixes across so many different bands?
Yeah, I mean, I think it always comes from, you got to have a great drum recording. I mean, I use samples, and I often do use a lot of samples, but first and foremost, it's about getting a great drum sound, in a great studio with a great room, great drummer, new skins on the drums, tuned well. I would get all those things happening first, and when I've got the best possible drum sound I can get and can't push myself any further with that, that's when I'll reach for samples. But I'll always ask myself, what does it need? What am I looking for? I'm not going to just, throw in any old sample, or I don't have like a set bunch of samples that I always use. The idea is to go, what's it missing? This is missing a bit of punch from the kick drum, so I'm looking for a sample that might enhance that.
Yeah, well, so many years ago, I worked with Tom Lord Alge on a mix,
Nice.
a record I was co-producing for a band called Atrixo. And one of the things that he said that I thought was interesting is, I think he said he used to I think maybe he said he came from a background of maybe using a handful of samples, and then he would scroll through all these different options, and then he was like, this is a waste of time. And he started doing something where he, like you said, he would sample a really great version from the actual recording for that record, and then that gives you the power of samples to enhance your drum sounds, but it gives you the uniqueness of each record.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of exactly why I do it too. Because I mean, we spent time getting a great drum sound, so why just replace it with, other samples? Use those cool sounds that you got, and you have that uniqueness. So, yeah, that's what I always sort of try and strive to achieve.
Right on. Well, and then you mentioned going in and placing one right up to the sample accurate. That's sort of the old school way of doing it, right? Where you just go through the whole song, and it takes a minute.
Yeah, it does, but you get good at it, or or your assistant gets good at that.
Yeah, exactly. Do you find that some of these tools that have appeared, in the last, well, I don't remember when it appeared, in the last decade, Slate Trigger, for example, it's remarkable that it can do things that were just so hard for us to do in the past. Do you find tools like that useful, or do you still feel like, it's wise for us to learn how to go in and just, carefully by hand put things together in a session for a mix like that?
Yeah, no, I do find them useful. I was using the Slate Trigger to do that. I like to actually create a MIDI event for a kick or a snare. So you could do that with Slate Trigger. But actually, I find the Massey DRT, I think it's called Massey DRT.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
It's great. It's just audio suite. And I find it's really, really quick. So what I'll do is I'll put the Massey DRT on, say, the kick drum, and then I'll bring the MIDI down, and then I'll go through, zoom up really, really close and individually make sure that every single one of those MIDI notes is perfectly, sample accurate with my kick.
Mm-hmm.
And then what I can do is actually use, I can create my own sample with my kick, and then I can just copy and paste it through, just with copy paste,
Mm-hmm.
with what do you call, tab to transient, or is it just tab into the next thing?
Yeah.
And then the other cool thing about that is I've got MIDI events all ready to go for, if I do want to add a kick drum sample, I've got the MIDI there, and I can then use that to use trigger or whatever sample thing I'm using. It's pretty much always trigger or battery. To sample that kick.
Yeah, I remember battery is one of the ones I started with for doing kick replacement. The first time I heard a Carl Tatz Phantom Focus mix room featuring his PFM HD 1000 series monitors, I was completely blown away. It was like listening to three-dimensional sound with rock-solid bass all the way down to 20 hertz. It was really incredible. What's amazing is that a Phantom Focus system can be implemented in your existing control room or even bedroom studio, giving you world-class sound for mixing. Go see how cool your studio could look and sound at phantomfocus.com. Do you think that, sorry to dig so deep into this, I guess we all geek out on drums a lot, don't we?
No, it's all good. Yeah. I mean, I was a drummer. So
there you go.
Yeah.
There you go. So do you find that, when we learn this stuff, kick replacement is a good place to start, and then snare requires a little more finesse?
I think they're about the same, really. I think I'm often finding with the snare for me, a lot of the time, if I'm using some samples for the snare, it's not really the actual snare itself. It's maybe like a room sound that I want to get from the snare. Whether it's using trigger, you have these options where you've got the close mics and the room mics and everything. And sometimes it's just adding a little bit of character or a bit of a sound behind the snare or something. So I usually find for my snares, it's those sort of samples I gravitate towards. But for the kick drums, it's more of a closer, punchier thing, or something with a lot more low end that I can't achieve from an EQ.
Right, because I guess that's one of the challenges is playing drums live. I mean, if it's John Bonham, when you go back and study that stuff, you realize, oh, nothing's ever really repeated exactly the same anywhere in the song. So,
yeah,
it's just all about the groove. But in modern productions, we really want, a lot of times we want a consistency of tone and dynamic and stuff like that, which is incredibly hard to do when you perform it that way. So, the kick drum, just getting that really perfect amount of low end. Because I guess what it is also, I realize, is as the low frequency shifts around in your mix, that's what makes it feel sometimes like a struggle as you're trying to dial in the exact right settings for things, and having consistency makes it easier to just find that sweet spot.
Yeah. And I think also, modern records are so bass heavy, there's so much sub information in there. So
yeah,
you really need to make sure it's really tight, not just the kick drum, but also the bass guitar. And, often if I'm recording bass, I'm always keeping an eye out for low rumbling that shouldn't be happening, or, where the bass player hits two strings at the same time.
Yeah. The old two-string trick.
Yeah. But, because if you're really going to be cranking a lot of, 60 hertz and stuff like that into your mix on your bass, you can't afford to have, just rumbling and things like that. So that's where the samples help, and some of those things to try and make that low end just really tight and fat.
Yeah. So Rockstars, that is one of the things that you begin to discover when you really focus in on trying to get super tight bass, is switching from the A string back down to the E string. For example, you get an open string that's just slightly ringing in there, which you don't notice when you're just rehearsing with the band in the rehearsal space. But when you have that under a magnifying glass in the studio, all of a sudden that gets amplified and it really screws at the bottom. And then another one is also the passing notes. Sometimes, a bass player doesn't realize that as they're doing that walk up to the next thing, or they do a passing note, they really didn't quite play that, second to last note or whatever, the last note before switching chords.
Yeah, it's actually something to really keep an eye on. And you can use your ears, but also you can use your DAW to actually, you'll actually see a bass note that has two strings rumbling.
Yeah.
So if you can kind of just keep an eye out and an ear out for it, of course. And yeah, do anything you have to, drop in those notes to, just make it really tight, really. That's, I definitely, I'm doing that all the time, just making sure, that it's just really tight and consistent.
Yeah, I'd say generally speaking in the studio, if we're looking for places to discover, errors that we didn't know we needed to look for before, it's usually in transitions. It's like switching from chord to chord. It's, going from one section in drums to the next section. It's across a fill. It's all those places where we go from one thing to another thing that we tend to, screw up just a little bit and not know it at first. So a couple of the records you've done, Big Energy and Little Spaces, Opshop, Junica, The Celebration. Again, both of those have big, fat snare room sounds. And maybe you can talk a little bit more about, how you make a drum sound a little bit bigger than life in the mix stage.
Okay, yeah. I'm really a big fan of room mics and large sounding rooms. So I think really the key is to make sure you're in the right studio and to have somewhere where you've got a bit of room that you can, compress and really get sort of the energy out of the room. It's a lot harder to do that in a small, dry room. So I actually really struggle recording drums in dry spaces. There are certain records that call for it, but I always still struggle on those ones. And yeah, I'm a big fan of stereo room miking. So I usually have your classic sort of A/B split pair room mics, and I often have a set that are closer. I have this technique which I call the floor technique and the floor mic technique, and it's if you put your head right down in front of the kick drum about I don't know, about 6 feet away. It was pretty loud there, but you can hear there's a nice, really fat thumping sound, and you sort of move your head around to find out where that sounds massive. And then what I do is I put 2 condenser mics, usually something like 414s, C414s, and I put them on cardioid, and I point them directly at the ground. And now these are only about 10 centimeters off the ground, facing towards the ground, so not even facing the drums. And I have them spaced about 4 foot apart. So it's a bit of a weird, strange technique. But if you get that sound and then really compress that through your TG limiter, TG1, you can get a really cool fat kick and snare sound without lots of horrible cymbals. And it just adds like a kind of a grit and a nastiness without it being too harsh. So that's one of my tricks.
Sorry to ask a dumb question, but 10 centimeters, what is that in feet, do we think?
Okay, maybe a half a foot, maybe?
Half a foot. Okay, cool.
Yeah. I mean, with any of my room mics, I'm always about just walking around in the room, and wherever it sounds its biggest, its fattest, where the kick drum really thumps you in the chest.
Yeah.
That's where I like to put the mics. So I'll do that, and then I'll try and find a place on the opposite side of the room to try and get that split A/B pair.
That's cool. It's just a great reminder to get out there and trust our ears. Now, of course, it's a little loud. I don't know if you like to, we try and keep ear protection like gun muffs on the way into the live room, just so that you don't always have to pummel your ears when you go out into the live room. But I guess if you do it briefly to check drum sounds, to check guitars and basses and stuff, it's just such a great way to make sure that you're starting with something that actually sounds good out there, because, when you just stick mics in front of a drum kit and then go into the control room and wonder why it's not exciting, that can be the answer.
Yeah, I mean, my mantra really is it's all about listening, and it sounds really obvious and dumb, but you have to trust yourself. So if you put up a set of room mics and you listen back to it, you have to ask yourself, does this sound great? Does it sound in phase? Does it sound right? Is it kind of what the record asks for? Don't just put them up and go, that's it. Really, listen to your gut and change it if it's not right.
Now, do you find sometimes you need a little bit more of a reference to make those judgment calls? Like, do you need to hear as close as possible to a finished guitar sound to be able to tell if you like the drums for this style of the record?
Yeah, I'm all about tracking things, how you want them to sound in the mix. So I'm not afraid of putting EQ on drums, compression on vocals. And so whenever I'm getting my next sound, like say, let's talk about guitars, for example. We've got a great drum kit, and I make sure that it sounds great, that whilst we're recording. So whilst we're recording guitars, we got, maybe the samples on there, all those things. And as we're getting that guitar sound, I make sure that I've got, the guide vocal in there, because it's really important. You don't know what kind of guitar sound to get unless you have that reference of, like the guide vocal and that kind of thing, because you can make a really great guitar sound, but when you put the vocal on, it could really
makes no sense anymore, right?
Yeah, it sort of destroys the vocal, or there's no room for the vocal. So I'm always making sure that I've got, as much stuff in my guide tracks as possible. And really early on, I like to get a really good guide vocal. It's one of the first things I like to do. So you can listen to the song the whole time with a guide vocal in there and know what the song needs.
But you're not asking the singer to sing over and over again necessarily.
No, I just, it's usually like when we're doing the guide tracks for the recordings, I'll get the singer to maybe do 2 or 3 takes, and then I'll do a quick comp, maybe even give it a little bit of a tune up, just so I've got it there for the next 2 or 3 days while we're, recording that song. It's the vocals in there, and you have that reference.
Yeah, right on. Okay, so you've got that guide track. It allows you to make the right decisions about drums. So definitely like consistency in the drums, but even cymbals and cymbal choices and things like that can come back to kind of bite you in the butt later if you made the wrong one.
Yeah, that's right. I'm always switching out. Yeah, I always like to have a plethora of cymbals and snares, and so you can just change out depending on the song. So often I have the same room mics and everything set up for an album, but it'll be changing the snare or changing the cymbals.
Yeah, right on. I love using iZotope plugins for my music and podcast productions. In fact, you're hearing Ozone and RX on my voice in this podcast episode. And now you can get access to all the iZotope plugins through the new subscription bundle. For only $19.99 per month, Music Production Suite Pro is designed for the serious recording, mixing, and mastering engineer, putting the finishing touches on music, film, and podcasts with fully pro versions of Ozone, RX, Neutron, Nectar, Neoverb, Tonal Balance Control, Visual Mixer, and more, including free plugin updates. And just for you, rock stars, get an extended 30-day free trial subscription at iZotope.com/rockstars and use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off any individual plugin purchase. Coupon not valid for subscription. The Envoy Pro Electron is the fastest, toughest, mini-sized, universal portable USB-C SSD that lets you record from anywhere in the galaxy with confidence. With speeds of up to more than a gigabyte per second real-world performance, the OWC Envoy Pro Electron gives you high-speed audio data for recording and playback. Take your sessions and sample libraries with you anywhere you go. Built for reliability, the OWC Envoy Pro Electron is waterproof, dustproof, and crushproof. Never worry about the storage and safety of your work again. Find the new OWC Envoy Pro Electron and all your storage needs at macsales.com/rockstars. Hey, Rockstars, we're back now for the jam session. My guest today is Clint Murphy, joining us from the UK. Are you ready to jam, Clint? And what's the name of your studio there?
Well, the studio where I'm at here, we've actually given it its own name called the Conservatory, because I'm doing something very different that I've never really done before. And because obviously with COVID, it's been very hard to make records, and I haven't really spent much time in studios, and I don't really feel comfortable going into some studios at the moment. So what we've done is we've hired an Airbnb, and I've brought my own rig basically, and we're doing everything except the drums here. So I have a lovely view looking out over a farm. It's lovely. It's really nice.
Nice, man.
Yeah.
Is it sort of, I mean, this will come out later, but is it cold, warm? Does it welcome you to go for strolls in the fields?
Definitely, for sure. It is cold, but it's spring here right now. And it's just, it feels very quintessentially English.
Quintessentially English. I love it, man. Okay, cool. So let's see. Let's talk a little bit about vocals. So Smoke and Mirrors, Opshop. One of the things that struck me was the intro to that song and the way the vocals are just right in your face. And like, there is nothing that gets away from you. It's like you do not miss a moment. And that's the thing I appreciate about your productions in general. What are some techniques we could use for helping to make sure a vocal is right forward and it's not sort of disappearing in and out of the mix?
Well, I probably have to say a big part of that would be my TG limiter, because it really does make it right up there in your face.
Yeah.
And but I mean, my technique for recording vocals would be I'll always put up a couple of mics. So, I mean, at the moment, what I'm using is I love my Sony C800 G-Pack. So I'll put that up and I'll put something else next to it, like a U87 or an SM7. So I have 2 or 3 mics and get them to sing into that. And it becomes pretty obvious straight away what is the mic, the correct mic for their voice.
And is the Sony is the one that looks like something out of Star Wars with the like heat sink grills on it and all that stuff?
Yeah, I love this mic. It's my favorite. I'm actually speaking on it right now.
Well, you sound great, dude. You sound
Oh,
great.
great.
Hopefully I won't mess it up when I mix it, right?
Well, it's it's a great mic, but it doesn't work for everyone. It's very it can be quite sibilant on some singers. So yeah, so I basically get the right mic, and like I sort of mentioned earlier, I like to go into an 1176 and then a TG limiter. And I find at that point, often when I get to the mix stage, I don't need anything else, not even EQ, maybe just a little bit of de-essing, of course. But yeah, I think, again, in the mix, you need to make sure that the vocal's kind of always there in a way. And I've struggled for that for years, and I still struggle with it, sometimes not mixing the vocal loud enough.
Well, so short of having the same outboard gear that you've got, what are some things in a session that help us just sort of make sure the vocals are sitting more appropriately? Do you find that it's useful to go through your vocal performance before you mix it and sort of, clip gain and things like that sort of create consistency to the dynamic?
Yeah, I'm often if things are being overcompressed a bit, clip gain is great. I'm using that a lot, especially to pull down some of the breaths or some of the plosives and things like that. Can really help. But actually, when I mix, and this is something that it took me a long time to sort of train myself to do, and I'm really glad I did. I mean, the rock stars can maybe take this as some advice, is I like to start my mix with the vocal, because the vocal is like it's the be all and end all, really. It's the main thing, to be honest. And so with any mix, whether it be on outboard or in the box, I get rough levels up very quickly. Like by the time you've started the song from start to finish, you should have your levels really, roughly up. And at that point, I start working on the vocal. So that's EQ, some compression, whatever it needs, but also a vibe, the delays, the reverbs. And I spend a good hour just making the vocals sound amazing. And then when you've got the vocals sounding amazing, everything can fit in around that then.
Right, because you don't want to screw it up at that point.
No, I used to make the mistake of not having the vocal in the mix at all for a good 2 or 3 hours and getting the most amazing sounding instrumental. And then you turn up the vocal and you think, this doesn't fit. There's no space, and so, yeah, I trained myself to sort of work completely the opposite way, and that's really done me wonders, actually.
Yeah, that's cool to hear you describe that process, because I think we're all familiar with the idea of you start with the kick, then you do the snare, then you bring up all your faders from left to right kind of thing. And to hear you talk about starting with the vocals, I think our first reaction is like, oh man, I'm really doing it wrong. I should do it the other way. But probably the takeaway is that we all needed to start that way. Like we needed to learn how to make a band sound killer in their mix, and then move over and learn how to do it in reverse by starting with the vocals, knowing that when it's time to make the kick or the snare or the guitar sound right, you know how to do that stuff. It reminds me a little of playing lacrosse in school, with the stick and the ball, and you start out learning how to do it right-handed. And then one day you have to force yourself to learn how to play left-handed, because if you really want to be good, you got to be able to be ambidextrous. And it's kind of like being ambidextrous in mixing.
Yeah, nice. I like that.
Okay, cool. So what are some other things that you find really helpful in vocal mixing? Let's talk maybe a little bit about delays and effects and things like that. Do we just like have a soup of effects that we bring up a little bit of everything and now that's our vocal, or is there more to it?
Yeah, I always start with, I've got a really nice Brocasti M7, which I use for reverb. So I usually start off with that on a setting, which is always the same, London plate. Nice. It's a nice dark sounding reverb, and it works for most things. And if it doesn't work, I'll switch that out. But I generally have that as an overall kind of reverb. And then I have a couple of extra little things going on. I'm really into using really massive long reverb times at the moment. So, 20, 30 seconds, and just throwing off a little bit of vocal, whether it's a falsetto line or something like into that momentarily.
So it's the vocal isn't washed in verb the whole time. It's more like in moments where you need it, you can just get this big bloom.
Yeah, like a nice little bloom, and that kind of adds a kind of a pop sensibility to it as well. And actually, one of the things I'm really digging at the moment is I have a reverb set up, and I have little altar boy, which is the so I have that pitched up an octave, and then I send that goes straight into a deverb plugin, really basic reverb plugin.
Yeah.
And so, which is set to about 17 seconds. So you get this lovely octave shimmer on top of the vocals. That's quite a cool cool thing to have in your arsenal of tricks.
Yeah, deverb is one of those ones that, when you first start mixing, you're like, oh, I can't use deverb. That's the stock one that came with Pro Tools, until you come back and discover it, and you're like, this is so cool. It's so not complicated, and it just does great little tricks,
Yeah, and you can do things like, even after that, put something like a decapitator or some devil lock on it, just to make it a bit even more horrible, And
yeah,
it's just trying to find little vibes where you can give a song character.
Plus, it's the one that you could just not have to set up as a send. You can just throw it right on an individual overdub and just create a sound and set it and forget it.
Sometimes I do that. If I just want a little vocal throw, I just bring make a new track, and I just, put the reverb and all the effects on that audio channel, and then just put that vocal, snippets on that track and fade it up. And it's perfect. It's easy. And you can just work really quick that way.
So our mutual friend who introduced us for this podcast is Ryan Smith over at Sterling Sound. Talk to us a little bit. Are you guys working together in the studio? Has he been doing some mastering for you? And maybe talk a little bit about the process of finishing a mix and going through the mastering for you. What works? What are some of the challenges that we might run into?
Yeah, Ryan, he's the man, right? Do you go to him for all your stuff?
I've done 2 records with him so far, and it's been great. We did.
Sorry, carry on.
Well, we did one with David Rogers, and I'm finishing one now with Chris Chamness as an artist.
Nice. Yeah, he's. I've been working with Ryan for, I think it's been about 17 years. It's been a long time, and I actually started off when I was living in New Zealand. I was actually a project coordinator for Sterling Sound. So, if anyone wanted things mastered in New Zealand, at Sterling Sound, they would come to me and I would help them out.
Cool.
So early on, I sort of met Ryan and just started sending all my work to him, and always kept recommending him to people. And, I think we've both really grown over the years as far as, our skill. And I've come to really rely on him. I really need him. He does 99% of my mastering. So he would, I know that he's always got my back in a way where sometimes he doesn't really tend to do much to the master, but that's perfect, because he knows not to do anything. And sometimes I get the masters back and I think, man, did I really mess up that mix that bad?
Right.
But he's great. I love him because he's he can seem to get stuff like loud, but not crushed, and he can retain all the low end, all the transients. It's got lots of energy. I don't know. He's just like a wizard. I think he just does something to my mixes that, like, I really, really enjoy. So long live our relationship.
I know in my own experience that the experience of mixing and going to mastering involved, me doing a mix, getting it to where I thought it was doing the right thing, and then I'd send it to mastering. And then there were many times where I thought the mastering was going to do something to my mix that it didn't do, probably because it just couldn't, because it was like I was supposed to do it in the mix, Mm-hmm. What are some things that have been like that for you? Has there been a learning process about what you need to get right in your mix and not expect it to come from the mastering?
Yeah, I think generally, if there's a problem with it coming back from mastering, it's not the mastering engineer's fault.
Mm-hmm.
If something's a bit crushed or something, yes, you could say, can we have a little bit less compression going on? But it generally comes from the mix. The vocal's not loud enough, or the kick drum's not loud enough, or
what about low end?
Yeah, low end. The low end is the hardest one for me, and that's actually where I have struggled and really rely on Ryan for that, because I was, for years I was mixing in the same studio, and I had an amazing monitoring. I could really trust the low end. And then when I moved to my mix room to my studio, it's a smaller room, and the low end is not quite as accurate. So I found ways to sort of overcome that. and to hear those things. But I really, for a couple of years, I really needed Ryan just to, every email to Ryan was, can you please check my bottom end? Can you check my low end? And he's sort of kind of, well, not really coached me, but just said, yeah, it's great, or don't worry, or actually, I needed to do a little bit of work here. But I think generally it's been okay. Yeah. Unless he's lying. He may be lying to me.
It's sort of, I just thought of a stupid joke, which is mastering is sort of the proctology of record making. They're always having to look at our bottoms.
Bottom end, yeah.
So what were some of the things that you started to, like, where were you? Because, I mean, so many of our listeners are in a home studio. Most of our listeners don't have a perfectly treated room. And so we're all familiar with the challenge of like, man, I thought I was doing it right. I listened to it over here. It's not. I'm starting to get sick of mixing this song. Mm-hmm. What were some of the things that you would discover not being right when you moved to a small room? How do you adjust for those?
Well, I think for me, it was just trying to, that low end really. I mean, you obviously can't mix what you can't hear. So you really need to have good monitoring and a good sounding room. Mm-hmm. And if you're limited by those things, I mean, first of all, get your monitoring, a set of speakers that you know well and or can learn, and just making sure they're in the right position in the room. I actually had mine set up in the classic, position. And then when I started having problems, I did some room sweeps and everything, and I had some guys help me out. And they said, get your speakers and actually push them right against the back of the wall. So for me, that was like, it's crazy. Why would you put your speakers right against the back of the wall? And what that actually did in the small room setting was it eliminated some of those antinodes where the bass dipped out. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that might not be the right thing to do for everyone, but if you can, try and do a room sweep where you put a tone out through the speakers and you can see, where your problems are, and then moving your speakers around within the room can really, really help. So now, I'd definitely say that is one thing.
So it was moving the speakers and then playing the tones into the room, but you're not necessarily moving the mic around, right? Like the mic is hopefully in the spot that you're going to end up sitting.
That's right. The mic is in the listening position. So, I actually use SonarWorks, which is a great tool for people. It's basically, it analyzes your room and then it adds an EQ to your room, and you can set how much you want to do that. So I use a little bit of that, but I needed to make sure my room sounded as good as it could before I could actually put that on. So I actually invested in some bass trapping and put out some acoustic treatment and stuff. It's nothing too fancy or expensive really, but if you can spend, $1 or $2, grand on that, it will really help. It will just boost your confidence as far as when you're mixing, you can actually hear what's coming through the speakers.
Yeah, it's funny how spending a couple of $1,000 on treatment of a room could feel ultimately like a better piece of gear than spending $2,000 on a piece of gear to try and get the bass right. Well,
that's it. Yeah. If it's really hard to hear things, you're going to spend longer mixing those things.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess the thing that I felt like I learned was there are so many places where you can make changes to your sound in the, if you don't, just even in the box, just with plugins, just with regular old stock EQs and compression, there are so many places you can change the sound. And therefore, if you don't know what you're doing when you change it, it's like trying to find a needle in a haystack.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's always about, I think, with anything, it's going back to that listening thing. You listen to it and then you decide what it needs. Don't just throw on plugins. You need to go, my vocal doesn't sound great. Why doesn't it sound great? It's because it's in the same frequency as the guitars. Okay, so what does that mean? Does that mean I take out some of those frequencies from the guitars, or do I need to boost the vocal out over top of the guitar? So it's really trying to decide before you make those changes, I think.
What if it's because the singer doesn't sound great? Next. Tell us about working with Enter Shikari and that mix of programmed and rock sounds. Are you using tools like the Eventide H9000? I almost feel like I'm hearing those kinds of plugins and swirling, flangers and things happening in the mix.
Yeah. I've got an H3000 analog outboard that I use on everything. I always use that for my vocal widening and things like that. So I have that set up on a hardware insert. I mean, actually, with some of the sounds, I mean, they're a very clever band, and they actually, some of the sounds were kind of had the effects and stuff on them. So, which is great, but also poses challenges to trying to make the vocal heard better or something like that. So there was a couple of particular, I can't remember exactly which tracks, but a couple of tracks where there were some great sounds, but it was really hard to hear what he was saying. So it's trying to
what do you do in those moments? Do you just, I mean, sometimes I'm just like, dude, just turn the vocal way the fuck up right in that moment, you know?
Yeah, but the problem is then it overshadows some of the cool, you know, parts within the, you know, the music, the instruments, like the guitars or something like that. So, I mean, one option is obviously to go back to the singer, which I would often do, and just say, hey, can you send me that dry? Or could you maybe take a little bit of the, you know, the balance of effects down?
I see. So you're talking about they sent you vocals with all kinds of filtery effects already on it.
Yeah, sometimes it was like that. And then sometimes you just have to use, I mean, I'm using a lot of multi-band compression actually on vocals. So you can, you know, really, I guess, change the vocal sound out or try and make it more present, have more presence or something like that, to rather than just, you know, standard EQ and things like that. So, I mean, multi-band compressors. Soothe is a really great one I'm using a lot for harsh vocals. Don't know if you know much about that plugin.
I haven't used it yet, but it comes up on the podcast. And then another one that came up recently is Golfos.
Yeah, I've heard of this one actually. I must try that one.
Which is pretty cool. And it does sort of similar stuff. It's like, you know, these magic trick plugins that you're like, some plugins, you don't really need to try and control them. You just put them on and turn them up a little bit and see what they do. And you like it or you don't. You know?
Yeah, I actually quite like these kind of plugins because I think, I mean, there's so many different, you know, like versions of EQs. And, you know, I mean, to be honest, I'm using the SSL, I mean, the UAD plugins a lot. It's mainly what I use, but I'm using the SSL channel strip for EQ on every channel because it's what I know, it's what I'm used to. And it's not really about, for me, switching out different EQs and different plugins. It's really about, you know, yes, EQ, but it doesn't have to, you know, you don't have to own every EQ under the sun.
Yeah.
To get great sound. It's more about, you know, levels and automation and, you know, effects and those kind of things, I believe.
Turning the right knobs because you can hear what you're doing.
Yeah, yeah.
One of the challenges for recording your voice is getting close enough to the microphone that you get a great bass boost proximity effect without getting blasts of wind on the microphone. Try this experiment. Hold your hand in front of your mouth and say, peanut butter popcorn. Feel that blast of air on your hand? That will cause a terrible sound on your microphone called a plosive. My favorite way to avoid this is to use the JZ microphone pop filter in front of the mic. This thing is built like a tank with a flexible metal arm that I can clamp directly onto the mic stand. It has a super cool waveguide design that looks like ripples on water and prevents the plosives getting through to the mic no matter how explosive the voice gets. Plus, it lets the high frequencies through for superb clarity on the mic. Get your vocals just right and use the limited time coupon ROCKSTARS to get 20% off the amazing pop filter at jzmic.com. The STX-100D from the Spectra 1964 Custom Shop is the big brother to the now famous STX-100. A fully discrete mic pre with dual transformer isolated Spectra 101 amplifiers, the STX-100D is exactly the same original circuit found in Stax, Ardent, AdVision, A&M, and Record Plant recording consoles. The sonic performance is identical. Best of all, it will plug into a single space of your standard 500 lunchbox. And if you want to add the sound of the famous Spectra C610 complementer, then check out the new STX600 modules, combining the STX STX 100 mic pre and C610 complementer in a single 500 module. Now you can get that same incredible sound in your studio that worked for famous producers like Tom Dowd with the STX mic pre's, BBDI, and complementers. Go to Spectra1964.com or call 801-797-0642. So let's see, Helpless by Opshop. That's a track that has this sort of classic rock compression on the beginning of it. You can hear like, maybe it's like, you know, and you kind of hear the compression going with that. Is that sort of a, if you know what I'm referring to, is that sort of a use of mix bus compression, you know, to get that kind of powerful drums and guitar intro? And what are some other thoughts you want to share about ways to use bus compression?
Well, I mean, when I mixed that records recorded and mixed that records, I wasn't really that heavy on my mix bus compressor at the time. I'm probably more heavy on that now. So it probably wouldn't have been the mix bus compression. It would have been elements within, you know, some of the drums and things like that. So often I liked to put on some of those room mics, things like the Sans amp plugin or, you know, distort rooms and things like that.
Nice.
Yeah. But I mean, these days, I mean, I'm still using the SSL G EQ. I have that set up, and I have that set basically on auto 2-to-1 compression most of the time, attack on 10, and I'm sort of getting anything between 2 to 3 dB of compression on my mix bus. So I'm not heavy with it, but I like to use it to add a glue. It certainly adds a glue to the mixes for me.
Yeah.
But I'm also bringing the mix back into an Apogee, and I like to just limit with the soft limit on that a little bit.
Really?
Yeah, just for a little bit of extra kind of sort of tape saturation type compression thing.
That's cool. I remember when we used to use the Apogee signature series, we were always like, make sure the soft limiter's not on. Like we were just afraid of it. We didn't know how to use it. It's funny, you know, there are so many little buttons like that in our studio environments, and it's kind of like if you don't take the time to discover what they are good for, you're gonna miss out on these great use cases.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I use the soft limit still to record the drums. I mean, I started out on tape, probably like you did as well, and so I like that tape compression. So when I'm recording my drums, I'm hitting them in and I'm soft limiting, you know, not crazy amounts, but the kicks and snares and toms and stuff, for sure. I love that sound. It's like extra compression for me.
Well, one of the things that I loved about recording to tape is you would set your levels and the tape machine was an input, and then I'd have the tape machine going straight to Pro Tools. And you'd quickly discover that Pro Tools was giving you overs. You'd get reds on the Pro Tools inputs. But that didn't matter because when you rewound the tape and played it back in, they were all gone because the tape just soaked them all up.
Oh, really? Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And I think, you know, features like Soft Limit will do that same thing. You know? It probably sounds slightly different, but same idea. Let's talk about recording with parallel treatments in the recording stage. You talked about trying to get as close to a mixed sound as possible while you're putting the band in. And one of the challenges for me with that has always been, okay, well, if you're recording in Pro Tools, how are you going to send it out to parallel compression? Because you don't have the phase relationship or distortions. You can't really do that until you play it back and start mixing it. What are the ways that allow you to do some of those things while you're actually in the tracking stage so that you can hear all these parallel treatments in real time?
Sometimes if it's like some sort of distortions or things on drums, I'll actually record through like some guitar pedals or something like that and actually record that in so you can get a little bit of a vibe, some sort of distortion or something.
But would that be one of the mics that you're going to use? And like one of the clean mics would go through a distortion pedal too, or you'd like set up a special mic just for the distortion pedal?
Yeah, I mean, the song would have to call for it, but I'd go, hey, should we just put up a mic in the room and put that through a distortion pedal or something like that? So, I mean, I'm not always doing things like that, but I do find with the compression on the room mics, I can get a sort of a hyped up sort of sound. So when the band, the drummer comes back in to listen, it does sound great.
Right. So it doesn't have to be a parallel treatment. It could just be simply putting the right kind of compression on the room mics to begin with.
Yeah, I don't really parallel until the mix, really. But it's different these days. I mean, the thing is, you might record the drums. I always do individual. I don't really ever get the band all to play together. I'm always doing, the musicians separately. So I would record the drums, and then once I've done all the editing, all those sort of things, I set up, some parallel treatments and everything on top of that. So when we go to record the bass, we have a really great, cool drum sound.
Yeah.
Yeah, to record to. I mean, it was one of the things I learned early on was when I first worked with a friend of mine, Gil Norton, who's done like the Foo Fighters and the Pixies. We still make records together. And Danton Supper was his engineer. And I remember it was a turning moment for me when they recorded something, and just straight away when it came back through the speakers, it sounded like it was mixed. It sounded amazing. And I just thought, that is the perfect scenario. You want the band to come back in and go, man, this sounds incredible, and then, I mean, why shouldn't it sound incredible? Because I mean, a lot of people just sort of throw up the mics and they, and I've heard producers say it before, say, oh, don't worry, it's not going to sound like this later. It will sound much better later on when we've done the mixing. Mm-hmm. But that's just wrong. You want it to sound great straight away. You want the band to be pumped, and to go, this sounds amazing.
Yeah. Well, so, as far as mix setups, I can see being able to do that very quickly, but have you also found that actually doing editing and stuff like that is part of that process, or does editing by definition have to happen after the drums are done being recorded?
Yeah, I always edit the drums after they've been recorded and then before I do anything else.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Any tips you want to share about editing process, smart moves for editing the drums and not screwing this stuff up?
Yeah, I've got a few tricks. One of the things that I do is, obviously when you have your full multi-track of drums, your cymbals and the room mics, there's a time delay. There's a natural time delay from, say, that snare hit to when it happens in the room.
Yeah.
Now, if you're doing lots and lots of edits because the drummer's not so great, you can often hear this kind of, sound, these edits happening. Mm-hmm. So what I do is I figure out what the exact, we're not exact, but whatever the time delay is. It might be, say, 500 samples between the kick and when it happens in the room. And I nudge all of these tracks forward so they all line up. Does this make sense so far?
Yeah. Actually, I had Chris James, who's been on the show. He once mentioned that idea to me many years ago too. So I know what you're talking about, but keep going. You're saying if the snare happens now in the close mic, it's going to happen a moment later in the overheads and another moment later in the room mics, and you're scooting those other mics forward so that now is now for every mic all at the same time, right?
That's right. And then I make the edits, and then I put those back to where they're supposed to be, so they have that proper time phase relationship. Do you understand?
And this is because you love working really hard on things, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, actually, most of the time it's my assistant doing it these days.
Oh, okay. Thanks, assistant. Thank you.
So, but it just means that if there are lots of edits, you don't hear the edits as much. So that's one of my tricks.
So let me see if I can say that a little bit. So I guess you don't hear it because, why do you think it is that you don't hear it as much if you do the time shifting?
Well, because say you've got a really fast hi-hat pattern. It's the 16th one. And it means what will happen is if you solo those room mics, you'll hear all these edits because the edits are happening well before the actual.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? So if you're bringing the edit closer to when that transient hits on that channel, you're less likely to hear it.
Oh, you know what it is? It's almost like doing tape edits where, if the tape edit's too steep, you hear it as a pop, but if it's sort of spread out by doing an angle, you don't hear it as much. It's, similar. You're spreading out all these crossfades a little bit, so maybe that helps a little bit.
Yeah.
And that reminds me, so one of the questions was, the band 8 Foot Sativa. Uh-huh. I almost misread that as 8 Foot Saliva, which would be just like a Gila monster or something. The Shadow Masters record, That has got some really high tempo rock. Just what you said, like super fast hi-hats and stuff like that. Maybe talk a little bit more about some of the challenges we run into when we're trying to do really fast drums like that. I can't remember, was that one that you mixed or was that one that you recorded and produced as well?
Yeah, I produced and mixed all those. Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
Did you split up the drums and the cymbals on a record like that?
So for some songs, yes. For some songs, no. The drummer was, he wasn't so up for the idea, but really wanted, to have these patterns, as fast as they were and stuff. So some things were difficult. So often we split some things up, but not others. But often for me, it's about the session and how it runs in a way. I mean, I could have sat there all day with the drummer getting it perfect, but you think about how much of a beating those drums get, and take 1 compared to take 40, the snare would have completely detuned.
Oh yeah, I've heard that before.
Yeah, so for me, it's about, there's a point where you have to say, okay, enough's enough. We need to find some workarounds, and I'm happy to do workarounds. So yeah, for that particular record, some stuff was separated, but not others. But yeah, I use these editing tricks. Another editing trick I use is I've given it a name, actually. I call it I like to schwam. Sample accurate waveform matching. I don't know what that really means, but what I do is when you see, on the waveform, you've got a peak and a trough. Yeah. So you might have your snare drum, and if you're making an edit, what I like to do is I try and match up those waveforms. So rather than it going from a peak to the edit point and then another peak, I make sure it goes from a peak to a trough. And if you do that on, say, it's mainly the snare drum, you get less of a weird artifact, like a ringing artifact. On a snare, if you're doing lots of editing, your snare might be going pang, and you'll hear bang, ging, 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 ging. Bang,
yeah, ging, ging. Right, because the hi-hat's going in the sustain.
Yeah, so if you can try and schwam as much as possible, you can actually avoid some of these artifacts.
Right, because you can't just let the snare be edited only on the quarter notes if the hi-hat's edited on the 16th notes.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, you have to be a little bit careful with, I think, how much you edit with 16ths. And often you can get away not editing the second or third hi-hat beat after the snare just because, it's masked by the noise of the snare. So I wouldn't often do everything, only the bits that kind of really need it.
Yeah, well, it's a lot of work editing drums. I've done it.
Yeah.
I've spent all day in the studio just editing the drums from start to finish on a song. And even with tools like Beat Detective, I think one of the challenges is learning that there's not a one and done thing. It won't do everything for you. You still have to go through with your magnifying glass and double check every single edit, and make sure that it didn't mess things up, and switching the time signatures around, or not time signatures, but sometimes the drums are triplets, the fills, things like that.
Yeah, I used to always use Beat Detective, and then I just realized it was just editing too much, and I was having to redo all the edits, and I just do it all by hand now because I'm quicker, and I do only the bits that need it.
Amazing. So maybe talk a little bit more about that. So if you're listening to a verse going into a chorus, what does that mean? Only the bits that need it?
Well, say for example, the main things for me are the kick and the snare, like in a groove, and those need to be on. If they're close to being on, I don't worry about it. Depending on the style of music, actually, but often if they're close enough, I'll leave it. And then the hi-hats or ride cymbal that are in between, I try not to be as aggressive with moving every single note, because I think you can get away with a little bit of that. But also, depending on what kind of album you're making, like for example, the Enter Shikari record or this record I'm making at the moment, there's lots of programming and there's lots of 808 bass lines and synths and stuff. So you kind of have to make your drums 100% on the grid. Otherwise, anything that you add electronically doesn't really fit that well. You get sort of some weird phasing problems between the low end with the kick drums and things like that.
Yeah. Are there some other tricks? Because I mean, like, well, are there other tricks where you might duck the acoustic kick against the sampled kick a little bit, or stuff like that? Or do you just sort of see the waveforms of your acoustic kick and your sampled kick, try and keep a lot of the low end from the live drums, but just make sure they're in phase?
What I do is maybe with the low end thing, something I do is on my bass or synth bass or whatever bass there is, I'll have a multi-band compressor on that, and I will send a side chain from the kick drum. So whenever the kick comes in, it doesn't turn down the whole bass, but it only turns down like 60 hertz and below momentarily, just to make way for that kick drum.
Yeah, I think I actually did a video not too long ago where Andrew Sheps showed a similar thing using his omni-channel plugin. Has a
Cool.
side chain on the de-esser, and you can go way down to low frequencies with it instead of de-essing. You're like D60 hertzing, you know?
Oh, that's cool. I should maybe look at that one.
Yeah. So, okay. So let's talk about guitars. I mean, I think guitars might be a little bit important on your records. What are some things, you know, I've seen a video of you miking up a 412 Marshall cab. Let's start with the first question. If you had to pick one amp for making rock records, what would, you know, your desert island amp, what would it be?
Well, recently I've discovered this, was it KSR? Do you know this brand?
No, I don't, not yet.
I mean, I don't know too much about it myself, but there's a great studio I use in the Czech Republic called Babylon Studios, and they've got an amazing amp collection actually. And this one amp does great clean tones, great distortion tones. It's, I think it's one that Nolly Getgood uses a lot. So yeah, I do like that. But you know what? I've always been like analog guy through and through. You know, always about miking amps. And I'm making a record at the moment, and for my first time in my life, I'm doing, dare I say it, everything with plugins.
So you've found that some of the some guitar tones are working for you when you do it in the box?
Yeah, I mean, let's put it this way. We haven't felt like we are compromising anything.
Yeah.
I'm sure if I had a stack of amps next to me, I would probably go for those, because that's the thing. People would always come into the studio with their Kempers and stuff and say, "Oh, I've got my great guitar sound." And I say, "Okay, well, show me your sound." And then I go, "Well, how about this great sound with this really loud amp?" And it always kicks the sound, you know, always. So, but yeah, I always just put a 57 and a Roya pretty much in the center of the cone. I make sure they're perfectly in phase. I actually white noise the amps. Do you do that or know what that is, or want me to explain?
I do. I'd love for you to explain. I just unplug the guitar and listen just for just coming out of the amp and use my ear as like a placement tool. But I want to hear what you're doing with the white noise trick.
Yeah, well, I've sort of just discovered actually that most of the time the sound I like from the amp is right in the center of the cone. So I basically put my mic there, the 57, and then I put the Roya 121 next to it, and I send white noise out into the amp and have it at, you know, a level where it's not too loud. But then I send that white noise to a set of headphones, and I can go right down next to the amp, and I phase reverse one of the mics, and then I move the Roya basically against the 57 to make sure that it almost completely cancels out.
Okay. And so how loud is this white noise coming through the amp? Is it like blasting or quiet?
It has to be, well, it's pretty quiet, to be honest, because if it's too loud, you can't hear it in your headphones.
Right.
It obviously damages your ears. But you don't need much. I just have it set up on my phone. Actually, I have a little plug out my iPhone, and it goes into the amp input.
You know? Oh, cool. So you're just doing it right out there at the amp.
Yeah. Actually, I'm using pink noise because it's got more low end. I quite like, you know, listening to that. But not only just for that one amp, because a lot of the time I like to record multiple amps at the same time. So I might have a really heavy, say, PV5150 sound, and then I'll add like a Vox AC30 in with that, so you can get a little bit of the actual pick noise and the clean sound to actually kind of define the amp sound a bit more. So when you're using two amps like that, you need to make sure that both those amps are in phase. So after I've white noised my first amp, say the 5150, I'll then open up the channel on the Vox, let's say, and I will phase reverse that and move the microphone back and forward until I can try and cancel out the other amp. And then I know that those, when I flip them back into phase, those are both in phase.
I love it, man. You're making the color pink rock and roll for all of us. Rockstars, I am super excited to announce that I'm doing a full studio remodeling here at the Toy Box Studio, headquarters of Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm working with the amazing studio designer Carl Tatz to upgrade my control room to a Phantom Focus mix room, and have also been improving the sound of my entire studio room by room. The first time I heard one of Carl's Phantom Focus mix rooms featuring the PFM HD 1000 series monitors, I was completely blown away. It felt like I was listening to three-dimensional sound where I could close my eyes and reach out and touch the instruments with crystal clear bass radiating from a 50-foot wall of pure marble. It was by far the best sounding mix room monitors I have ever heard anywhere. Check out my complete interview with Carl Tatz on episode 50 of the podcast and discover the secret to massively improving your monitor setup at carltatzdesign.com/mixroom-mentor. Groovy. That's a great trick. I'm going to try that one out. I haven't tried that yet, but it's so important to get mics in phase. Do you remember early recordings and not knowing about phase and wondering why it was that nothing sort of leapt out of the speakers?
Yeah, I do. And one thing that whenever people ask help, friends of mine or people want help getting drum sounds and stuff, I just love the way you can blow somebody's mind by flipping phase. Like, they had their drum sound up and you say, the snare is terrible. You just need to flip the phase on that snare and flip the phase on that and flip the phase on that. And all of a sudden it's just fat and big and they go, whoa, that's amazing.
Do you have a sort of a go-to process for checking phase on drums? Or I guess guitars aren't as hard because it's just two mics, maybe a few more.
Yeah, I generally start with my overheads and I get my overheads up and I make sure that when the drummer hits the left cymbal and the right cymbal, that it's, I'll rewind a bit. I get to hit the snare. So the snare is nice and in the center. Okay. And then I get to hit the left cymbal and the right cymbal. And if they're at nice, even levels, I'm cool. I'll carry on. But if they're not, I'll move the microphones around to make sure that I've got really good imaging between my left and right, but also a big fat snare in the middle.
And this is sort of like, a classic would be just overheads, just sort of looking down at the drum kit from above, but a spaced pair.
Yeah, I usually gravitate towards two things. One would be the spaced pair, an A/B style, or I like the ORTF, which is 30 centimeters spaced apart at a 90-degree angles. I mean, look it up on YouTube or Wikipedia or something. So that's a great one. I always with everything do two. So I actually put a space pair up and an ORTF, and then I listen to what one I like the best, and then I only keep the one that I like.
Oh, so cool.
I've always got a reference between, it's the same like I said with the vocal, put up two vocal mics, you choose one.
So you got plenty of mic stands.
yeah, exactly. So once I've done that with the overheads, then I bring the snare in and I check the phase of the snare with the overheads, like, the snare top. And then I check the snare bottom, and then I check the toms, and then I bring in the kick and check the kick against all that, and then bring in the rooms. And then obviously that's when you start with all the problems. Right. The more mics you have, the more issues there are with phase. And often I might need to move some of the room mics around. I'll always move them around rather than trying to fix them later.
Yeah, that's cool. But it's a good reminder. You got to narrow it down for checking something like phase. You got to start with something and say, okay, this is our starting point. Now, as we add things to it, does it work or not work? And, in the same way that like start with the vocal and bring your mix in. And if it doesn't work, well, then you can't do that, Same thing with the phase. And then you get to the room mics at the end. And it's like, if you can't flip them and it sounds good, just move the room mic around.
Yeah.
Otherwise you just start flipping everything randomly and you just get tired and don't know what you're doing.
Sometimes I actually really struggle to hear it. And I just use the people around me, my assistant or the band or anyone. and just turn around and say, what sounds better, this or this?
Yeah, whoever's sitting in the back on the couch, that's who I turn
That's the one.
to.
Yeah. I know it's a funny one, isn't it? Or even just standing up, or sitting down or moving over to one side. You can sometimes hear things better just by positioning yourself within the room.
Yeah, it's like I want an average of where the phase sounds best for everybody everywhere. I suppose in a perfectly dialed in control room, there should be one sweet spot that you make the judgment call. But in my studio, traditionally, and then in most places, I find you're sort of taking a cross section of what's best.
Yeah. Well, the problem is when your kick drum's down on channel 1 and you're on a 78 channel console, it's quite hard to check the phase.
Right. Right. Good point. Good point.
Actually, what I do is when I think I've got it, I then get samples, and then just within Pro Tools, I set up some time adjusters with just the phase switch on, and I just double check it. Then just I can bring it down to a lower level, or just so I can, without having to have the drummer sitting there going bang 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 checking the phase.
Right.
It's quite a good idea to just record a little bit and then just double check it before. It's worth spending an extra 10 minutes on, because once you've got it, you don't have to worry about it again.
Yeah, I think I might need to try that trick more. I'm pretty quick about checking phase, but the drummer still has to put up with a bit of that for me to do it. And it's a good reminder to just sort of put the trim plug in or the time adjuster plug in on every track, record whatever's out there, and then take your time to flip phases until you got what you like. The only challenge is then you have to recreate that. You have to go okay, so I flipped this one, so I'll flip it back and I'll go flip it over here. And, but it's just a good reminder. Don't wear the musicians out.
Well, also I think what's quite a good thing about it is you can actually just select one snare hit and you can loop that one around, because if it's the same hit and you're checking the phase, it's a bit more obvious. But if a drummer's playing a snare and they're quite an inconsistent drummer, one snare hit that they play might be big and fat, and then the other one might be, hit on the side and a bit smaller. So, you've got more, how do you say it? When you've got that one sample playing, it should be much more obvious because it's the same sound that you're checking the phase with.
Yeah, you're really A-Bing something.
Mm-hmm.
When I play drums, it's incredibly consistent because I'm not out there playing drums. Okay, so let me see here. Oh shoot, what was I going to just take you to? We were talking about guitars. You check it with the 57 and the 121. Oh yeah, you're talking about guitars in the box. Mm-hmm, so what are some of the tools that you've really been enjoying for getting a great in the box guitar sound?
Well, I've really been playing around with these neural DSP plugins. So what I quite like about them, or really any plugin that I like, is when it's user friendly and it feels natural to me. So with these plugins, you've got a really great selection of microphones that you can use on the cabinets, and you can move the microphones around, and they're using the 57 and the Royer. So already to me, they're familiar sounds I'm used to.
Yeah, it's cool. I'm looking at their webpage right now, and I love the fact that they were like, we're not going to waste all our money on graphics. We're going to keep the graphics really simple and just, focus on the way they sound.
Yeah. A lot of the amps are quite heavy sound, so they're not for everything. But there's a really great one there, a Corey Wong one, which is clean tones. But often what I'm doing is I use a lot of guitar pedals because I really like creating my own sounds, I guess, new. And it's something that another producer friend of mine taught me, Greg Haver, who's a great friend of mine. Mm-hmm. And by sort of putting, distortion pedals on, or compressor pedals, or whatever pedals on before the amps, you can create your own tones. So even with these plugins, I'm still doing the same thing. I'm putting effects on before they go into it, just to get something a bit unique to my style.
That's cool. Yeah, I'll have to check these ones out. Rockstars, it looks like they've got demos for all these different amps too. So if you just want to go check them out, Neural, Neural DSP. That's worth checking out. Cool, man. Cool. All right. So, in my experience, I've also been using one called Helix from Line 6, and I was really blown away with the quality of the sounds in there. I found it really useful for the overdub process when you are trying to add something to a bigger bed of guitars. I haven't tried building a whole track out of it, so I'm looking forward to trying that. Any other tricks that you've learned about getting the guitar in there? When I've had like Roger Allen Nichols on the show, for example, part of his tips was that he found it was if you were going through a tube mic preamp to get your guitar into the computer before the processing, he found that to be helpful. Have you discovered that there are any other little tricks to getting your guitar in just right?
Are you talking about just with plugins? Like
yeah, if you're going to do a plug-in guitar amp, is it important how you capture your guitar into the computer?
Yeah, I mean, of course, I'm trying to use nice sort of DIs and that sort of thing. I'm not actually a huge fan of tube stuff. I mean, I'm all about the transistor, to be honest. I
nice.
just love. Yeah, I like the aggression and the bite that it has. So I usually steer away from most things tube. Even compressors, I like really fast release times and things like that.
And which mic pre would you be reaching for?
Well, at the moment, what I've just bought is some Heritage Audio 73 Juniors, and so I'm using that, which has a DI input on the front. You can just plug straight in, which is fantastic. And I'm also using I've got an SSL VHD pre, which I'm using as well, just with the DI box. So I've got a couple of things covered there. I've got the clean thing covered, and I've got the the slightly warmer sort of Neve thing going on too.
Yeah, the Neve 1073s are so much fun when you first discover them. I like the fact that you can crank them all the way up and they just have a fuzz of their own.
I know. I love that. And you know what? Because I grew up on that EMI Neve I told you about. As soon as I started working on SSL, it really, really threw me. I just couldn't get the sounds, that I was used to.
Yeah.
But now I'm a bit of a converted SSL boy, to be honest.
Yeah, well, I enjoy using all the SSL plugins. I have their new Duende plugins, and I just like having a setup to mix where you know what to reach for when you want to do something. It's one of the struggles of the world we live in, where there's the options are so endless. Is like that book, The Paradox of Choice. That applies to making records in the studio with plugins, right?
I think so. It's never really been about the equipment for anything, and I think it was same with plugins as well. I try and tell people, like, buy a plugin, but learn it really well. Use it for 6 months to a year and know everything about that before you go and buy another one, because you really can do almost anything with that one plugin. I mean, like I said, I'm using the UAD SSL channel strip on virtually every single channel as my EQ, because it's what I know. I know it in depth. I know the difference between the G and the EQ, and it's just what I'm used to, and I don't have to think about it. You just sort of turn the knobs the way that feel natural.
Okay, so what is the difference between the G and the EEQ?
Well, for me, it's really kind of about the top end and the low end. I think basically when you're switching in on the G or the E, you can hear, like, especially if you boost the top end quite a bit, you'll hear a difference where one is quite harsh and aggressive sounding, and one is a little bit more kind of softer on the top end. So, for example, you might want to use the softer top end for, say, drum cymbals, but for like keyboards or some sort of synth sounds, you might want a bit more of an aggressive sort of top end there.
Right, more of a bite. Yeah, that's a good tip, though. It's a reminder. It's like turn the knob first and then just hit the button and see if you like one versus the other.
Yeah. I mean, I can't even remember which one's which. I just, I think when you press the E one in, that makes it a bit more, a bit softer sounding.
Right. Yeah. I mean, again, the takeaway is, rock stars, we're not supposed to turn our brains on and remember which one does what. I mean, I suppose we might at some point, but it's not about pre-thinking a move like that. It's about making the move and then seeing if you like one or the other and move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
Talk about your mix template. How do you like to start a mix? What is it? Are there some routing options that you sort of always start with, or any of that kind of stuff that helps you streamline your process?
Yeah, for sure. I have, I have everything comes out of my Apogee Symphony Mark II, which goes into a SSL Sigma summing amp. And so I have in Pro Tools, I have everything sent to a drum bus and then a bass bus, guitar bus, and so on. So I have 16 outputs, and that they go to my summing amp, and then the summing amp goes into my curve bender, which is the EQ, and which you talked about earlier, and then into my mix bus compressor, and then back in. So that is my template for that.
And the curve bender is something where you just kind of give it a little bit of brightness, a little bit of fatness in the low end kind of thing.
Yeah, I basically start with it on, and it's a couple of dB of 10K and a dB of 70 hertz. And actually, the UAD version of this, or the soft tube one, is actually insane. It's really, really good. So if you haven't tried it out, you should definitely try it out.
Nice.
Yeah, so I have that, and then I have some bits that are hardware inserts. So I think I mentioned about my Bricasti reverb unit, and I have H3000 and some spring reverbs and some things like that. And I have my TG limiter set up as a parallel compression for my drums. And essentially, I kind of what I mentioned earlier, I try and just start throwing the faders up to mix. And once the mix is up, like maybe a pass for the song, start working on that vocal. Actually, there's a thing that I do, which I think is kind of cool, is I've taught myself never to solo anything.
Nice.
So if I want to EQ a guitar, rather than soloing it and then getting a great guitar sound on its own and then unsoloing it, I always just try and EQ that in the mix. Sometimes it's quite hard to hear maybe a guitar sound because the vocal's so loud. So what I'll do is I'll just turn the vocal down a little bit momentarily and then do the EQ, because then will that EQ affect the vocal?
Yeah,
or it might be the same thing with the drums, the kick drum. I might just turn the kick drum up really loud and then EQ it, and then just bring it back down to where it is.
That's interesting. Yeah, and I've noticed that sometimes, if you don't even move the level of that instrument, you could be turning a knob and you're like, I just don't hear it. And then you're like, oh, maybe that's because it's not doing anything.
Yeah, I've got to turn it on.
or just that, like you're adjusting things that just, they're so masked, they hardly matter kind of thing. Whereas when you solo, you're convinced that you're like, oh, I'm definitely doing something here,
Yeah. I mean, soloing has its place. And I mean, yes, I will solo if I hear a weird noise and I think, what is that? Is that a buzz or a click or something? And I, need to hear it. So I will do that. But as far as EQing and compressing and any of the kind of mix related stuff, I'm always doing it with the whole musical palette in.
Want to know how to record killer drums in your studio? Rockstars of Drums will show you how to record, edit, and mix pro-sounding drums with examples from Nashville session drummers in a Grammy-winning studio. Want to know how to master your own music at home? Rockstars of Mastering will show you how with plugins in your DAW so that your music will sound awesome when you finish your mixes. And if you're looking for a step-by-step solution for a pro mix that won't take years to learn, Ultimate Mixing Masterclass with Craig Alvin will show you a proven method for creating Grammy-winning quality mixes that you can apply in your home studio right now. Or if you just need to learn the fundamentals of a great mix, then register for my free course, Mixmaster Bundle, to get great mixes using simple, free plugins. Get started now making your best record ever at recordingstudiorockstars.com/academy. Use the code ROCKSTAR to get 10% off any course in the Academy for a limited time. So when I was in architecture school, before I decided to do music, I took a class that was teaching us how to do some painting at one point. And we had to do a still life. And I went home and I set up my thing and I sketched it out. And then I sat there and I tried to completely paint in this one little object in one corner of the thing and then move on to the next one. And I brought him my painting the next day. And, there was somebody else who had just like roughed in a little bit of everything all at once. And his painting looked amazing. And mine was just like, I didn't even know where to go next. And I've carried that forward with me because it's that same idea of like trying to solo one instrument and get it perfect and then begin to add the next thing in the mix versus learning how to, like you said, to just pull up all the faders and get it into place first and then start adjusting things relative to the other stuff.
Yeah. I think that I mean, we focus, I don't know about you, but it's so easy to focus on the minutiae and not see the bigger picture, the song. We worry too much about what EQ should go on the hi-hat. And it's really all about the relationship, the level between the vocal and the guitarist, and whether you're feeling the vibe. And, it's about the vibe that comes through the speakers of the song, and it's just got to try and forget about the technical stuff in a way.
Yeah, well, that's one of the beauties about having a really good setup is you can trust that your instrument, the studio, your mix bus chain, your plugins that you're choosing are all quality instruments, and now you can just focus on playing, as a mixer. Well, so what about, your mixes have a quality to them that's, I describe as, loud and proud in your face. You've already told us about your mix chain, which is great, but what about the actual listening level too? I mean, do you find that you need to listen loudly to make the right kind of calls? Have you learned anything about that? Do you have like a sweet spot for how loud you like to listen while you're working?
Yeah, I mean, for years when I was younger, I used to listen loud, and that was a bad decision. I think if people can not do that, because it's just obviously damaging for your ears, but you can't really hear anything.
Yeah.
So I actually mix super, super quiet. On a decibel scale, I don't quite know, but I mean, it's funny actually. At one point, when I moved out of the big studio into my home, I've got kids around and everything, and they went to bed early and stuff, and I tried to keep the level down, while I was working away at 1 and 2 in the morning.
Yeah.
And so I got actually used to like listening super quiet, like almost to the point where you can't hear it, and I would come in the next day to listen to the mix, and I'd be like, wow, this sounds incredible, because you can hear, everything at low level was heard. So yeah, I would definitely try and monitor as low as you can. And then another trick I have is just switching it up. I mean, this is a pretty common trick, switching it up between speakers, or just taking it away from what you're used to, even if it's putting on headphones momentarily, and then changing that scenario of how you're listening. And then the other thing, I mean, the only thing about listening loud, it's good to hear the low end that way. It's much easier to hear the bass.
Yeah.
But what I have done is there's a cool plugin, which I think is called Metric AB or something. Yeah, I think that's what it's called. But essentially what I do is roll off, or let's say I only solo the sub element, so like 60 hertz and below. And so what you can do is, this is a really great way to check your low end if you don't have a very good sounding room, is that you put it into that mode, or you could just roll off all the top end with a filter, and then you can turn it up. That way you're not going to destroy your ears, but you can then feel what the kick drum and bass relationship is doing. And if one is louder than the other, or one is rumbling or something, I find that's a really cool way to work.
And you're doing that, you're checking this sort of like filtered low end against a reference mix.
No, just my own mix, because you turn it up and I might go, whoa, okay, the sub bass is just huge, but my kick drum is tiny.
Right.
So then I go, okay, and then I just make some EQ adjustments to the kick and the bass, and then I turn it down again, and then listen to it with the full mix coming through, and then it's actually quite surprising what you can do with that little trick.
Yeah, we'll call it the womb check. It's like, you want to make sure your unborn kids will love the sound of this record too, right?
Yeah, that's cool. Do the womb test. I love that.
Nice. Sorry, I cut you off. You were about to pivot to something else.
No, well, you mentioned about, do you check other mixes against that?
Yeah, reference mixes.
Yeah, sometimes I do for that low end thing. I mean, I don't often reference mixes much these days for sonics, but I mean, I probably should every now and then, because it does give me a wake up call every now and then when I listen to someone else's mix and I think, oh wow, that's pretty cool. What can I do to make that sound like that?
Right.
But but you can also check the low end of other mixes against your mix using this technique.
Yeah, that's cool. Let's jump forward. We're getting near the end of the episode here. You have an awesome looking website. This is kind of related to some of these outro questions too here. For example, a business tip, one of which is usually have a pretty good website. You got a great looking website. Talk to us a little bit about If you want to talk about how you did that, fine. If you want to talk about just the process or the importance of having a good website and the elements that you chose to include there to make it really effective.
Well, I mean, I have to give a big heads up to Joe, who made the website, who was a friend of mine. I really wanted it to be, kind of that. I like that 1073. Sorry, not 1070. That EMI Neve thing, which is actually original photos from that Neve I worked on. So I wanted it to make it look a bit vintage. I mean, it's not probably that great to see on an iPhone or a tablet. It's more of a, on a full PC to look at it. But I just like the idea of the records and all those kind of things on there.
Well, like your discography, like you've got this page where it's all the record covers, and you hover over it, and then you can click on it, and it opens up, and it'll play for you, and that's cool,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's good. I mean, I don't know how much work I've got from my website. I find actually one of the biggest tools in getting work is actually Facebook and Instagram and stuff. People just reach out via that more than anything. But the website's good for the discography. You can, people can head to that and listen to work you've done and that kind of thing.
Do you feel like at this point people just know who you are and they know that they want to find you to make their record, or do you have your own way of also letting the world know what you're doing? I mean, you're here on this podcast right now, but what are some other ways that you sort of, put your work out there for people to be aware of what you're doing?
Yeah, I probably should be a bit more, bit better at putting more stuff on social media. I mean, every time I put things up, I end up getting some kind of work from it or something. So I think it's a really good idea to do that, and I should do that. You've reminded me to do that more.
All right, good.
But yeah, I think I mean, obviously for me, people will come to me because they've heard another record that I've done, and would sort of want that kind of sound or whatever. So that's usually how the work comes. But yeah, I mean, you just got to do, I think, as much as you can. One thing I stopped doing was I stopped going out to see bands, and I got into this whole thing because of music. And a friend of mine, actually, he's another engineer, Nick Abbott. He said to me one day, "Do you not like bands anymore?" I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, do you not go out to gigs?" And I was like, "You're kind of right. I don't." And then I started doing that again and rediscovering like music, and so it was great. So I'm always trying to go out and find bands that I want to work with and that kind of thing. So I usually try and pick 2 or 3 artists every year that I just give a freebie for and just say, look, let's just come and do a track for free.
Smart.
So that's quite a good way to try and find great sounding bands. And, it might not work. That band, your relationship might not work properly with that, but it might be their manager that has another band on their roster that gives you work, or they might know someone from a label. So it's all about networking.
Any other thoughts about just like starting in the studio? Is it cool for us to just simply go into the studio with a band, do a free thing, and just do it and leave it at that? I mean, do we just do it and we just say, here you go, take this, do whatever you want with it? Or is it like we do a thing and then we start a conversation with management to try and, if they love it and they want to move forward? I mean, I don't know. What are some pitfalls with that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many schools of thought about this. Some people say it's fine. Some people say it's not fine. I don't really agree with doing stuff for spec or for doing stuff for free. I think it's wrong. But I mean, the reason I do it is for my own development. So I might find a band that I like and then do some songwriting with them or something. I mean, that's actually kind of like my new model moving forward a little bit is, you find a band you want to work with, and then you start the songwriting with them, and then you become part of that songwriting process, and then you get the songwriting credits as well with them. And then I just do a really good job of doing the demo. So it means that when it comes time to actually doing the recording, actually, the lead vocal's done, the guitars are done, it's all done. I just need to mix, and then they just need to pay me. That's kind of how I sort of am working most of the time.
That's cool. That's good thinking. And yeah, I'm with you on that, going out to live shows. I don't go out as much, but when I do, I almost always end the night feeling like, man, that was so much fun. I saw so many great bands and I met all these people, and what a good idea. I should do that more often.
Yeah.
Well, very cool, man. Let me go to our closing question here. This one is hypothetical. And we're going to take the Wayback Studio machine, and you get to go back in time and find young Clint You go up to the beach and you say, come in off the waves, Clint, put your surfboard away. No, I don't know whether you're really doing that down in New Zealand.
Definitely doing that.
Okay. All right, good. And then you say, listen, man, I just come here to give you this one bit of advice. Here's the single most important thing you need to know and do to be a rock star of the studio yourself one day. What advice would you go back and give yourself if you could rewind the clock?
I think try not to stress too much about what you're doing and just enjoy it. A lot of people really stress with mixing. Is it good enough? It's just have fun. As soon as you have fun and you dance while you mix and you just get into it, the energy will go into that. And then towards the end, when you're trying to, do the fine tweaks, then concentrate, on some of those things, but just enjoy it. Enjoy the whole process. The music is supposed to be fun.
I love it, man. Music is supposed to be fun.
It is fun.
Never been said better. Clint, thank you so much for joining us on Recording Studio Rockstars. You're awesome, dude. Where would you like the Rockstars to go check out your work, and what if they need to make their next hit record with you?
Probably, like I said, I'm quite bad at keeping things up to date, but probably Facebook or Instagram. I'm posting things up of things I do there. So yeah, just search Clint Murphy Productions. It'll come up. You'll see links to me.
Awesome. And Rockstars, we of course have a Spotify playlist in the show notes. You can click down and go listen to a bunch of these great records. I apologize. We didn't really get to dig back into Enter Shikari too deeply, but we can always come back and do another one and talk more about, some of these great creative mixing techniques you're using. But also there's a YouTube playlist in there too. And you're present on YouTube. You do a lot of teaching, so there's a lot of great stuff to go watch and learn more from you. So thank you so much for being here with us, man. I look forward to meeting you around the studio, and I'm going to go listen to some more of your records.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on. I feel honored to be part of your show, and you keep doing good things for everyone.
All right, man. Thanks so much, Clint. It's an honor to have you here. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. And if you want more free content from Recording Studio Rockstars, all you have to do is go to rsrockstars.com/email. Again, that's rsrockstars.com/email to enter your name and email, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, podcast updates, and even free gear giveaways for your studio. Just look for the link in the show notes below. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lyd Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our amazing sponsors who help make this episode possible. OWC, Carl Tatz Design, Spectra 1964, Isotope, and JZ Microphones. Remember to use the coupon codes ROCK10 at isotope.com/rockstars for 10% off any plugin purchase, or use the coupon ROCKSTARS at jzmic.com for 20% off the pop filter for a limited time. And don't forget to learn how to get your monitoring just right at carltatzdesign.com/mixroom-mentor. And finally, use the coupon code ROCKSTAR for 10% off any course at Recording Studio Rockstars Academy for a limited time. We'll include all these links in our show notes. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio. They're going to help you make your best record ever. I would also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars: Vlad Weselchenko, Braden Stremming, and John Richardson for additional podcast and video production. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.